Welcome to our podcast, From Stardust to Us, in-depth conversations with thought leaders, artists, and spiritual activists navigating the challenges of our times with integrity, joy, and purpose. I'm Linnell Hayden, an advocate for animals and the natural world, a world traveler fascinated by other cultures and spiritual traditions, and these passions have deeply inspired both my life and my work.
I'm Bernice Marie Daly. I'm a contemplative activist and a spiritual guide across wisdom traditions. Welcome, everyone. We're happy today to introduce our guest, Valerie Andrews. And Valerie is a writer, editor, and seminar leader who is passionate about our story of home. And she has moved 31 times. So she is experienced, shall we say. The founder of Reinventing Home Culture, Creativity, Character, which is a quarterly magazine and a podcast that she offered during the pandemic. And she's the editor of Sanctuary, The Inner Life of Home, which was recently published in the book that we're going to be focusing our conversation on today. And her next book, The Story of Home, will be published later this year. For the past 3 years, Valerie has hosted an online seminar, Tell Your Story of Home, to an international audience. She's also the author of A Passion for the Earth, a book about our sacred marriage to the natural world. Her articles have appeared in Vogue, Esquire, and New York Magazine, and she is the founder of Sacred Words, a Center for Healing Stories. We also like to celebrate the fact that the three of us, Valerie, Linnell, and myself, are all members of the Guild for Spiritual Guidance. So welcome, and I'd like to begin our conversation by asking you, what is it like to move 31 times, and how has that left an impression on your being and psyche, on your interest of understanding what home actually means? You share a little bit about that with us.
Well, I think the reason I got so interested in the theme was because I had moved so many times as a child. I was kind of a latchkey kid, and I was on my own a lot. And I had one place that was my foundation that I lived from about age 7 to 12. And, in psychology, we talk about a good enough mother. Well, I would extend that to a good enough home. That was my 7-year period in Eden, where I lived in nature, and I wrote about a little ritual I had and a passion for this earth when I lived in Hillside, New Jersey, a very bucolic name, across the street from a truck farm, down the street from a chicken ranch. It was not paved over like it is today. It really was the Garden State. I had so much given to me from the earth and from nature in that place. I was the only child, both parents worked. So I developed these rituals that were my way of homing myself. And I would go out and I would lie flat down on the earth at the end of every day, right around the time of sunset. And I would feel the heartbeat of the earth, and I would listen to the breeze, and I would watch the sun go down. And I would know that I was completely one with creation and one with that space. And that was my good enough home that got me through all the craziness that followed. And, my parents deciding in the middle of the night, oh, we're going to move next month. And then we'd be in another apartment somewhere in another town, and another bunch of friends to make. And, it could even be June, and I'd be taking exams for classes I never had in that particular school. So I think that is a metaphor for our experience of home today. Most of us have some place that still grounds us and still speaks to us. But Americans have moved a lot in the last 30, 40 years. Not as much as I have, but it's been a bellwether. And when I ended up in New York, my apartment was a kind of United Nations, because I was drawn to people who had come here from other countries and other cultures. And we're trying to figure out, what is this place called America? How do I fit in? And am I allowed to say anything bad about it? And of course, in my house, one of the rules was you say what you think and you feel, and you get accepted for it. Nobody is going to come back at you and say, well, why did you come to this country if, you have every right to your full feelings and contradictions and expressions of what it means to try and build a life in a new country and be homesick. And one of the articles I wrote for Reinventing Home was about the fact that homesickness was considered a medical malady in the 1800s, when we had waves of immigrants coming to America. Doctors would diagnose certain people with what we would today call failure to thrive, but it was the same thing as homesickness. And so how do you comprehend the fact that you no longer have your culture, your community? We evolved to have tight ties with, I think the number is about 38 people, but it's 38 to 40 is the tribal number of people that we can manage to be close to. And when you lose your family and your tribe and your culture and you're stranded in another country, the sense of self is just often shattered. It's not often strong enough to hold that. And we see the same thing with people who survived natural disasters. I mean, today we're all dealing with what's happening in Los Angeles and the tremendous brush fires there and the complete destruction, utter destruction of Pacific Palisades, an entire community, businesses, people. In Northern California, we lived through something similar. Our fire was considered the worst fire in the state until Palisades surpassed us in terms of acreage and damage to business. But I remember getting the signal that we would soon have to evacuate. I was living in Marin County, just north of San Francisco, and we were very close to big fires in Santa Rosa. The smoke was awful, and there were several other brush fires that were starting in Novato and in other areas that were going to cause us to move. And I started to think, what would I take with me? And that sort of felt like a betrayal of everything. It's like, how do you choose? It's like Sophie's Choice. You have to choose one child. Or do you grab the family Bible? Do you take your favorite painting? You can't move the piano. What about the flute? It's all, you're paralyzed because you can't even comprehend with what makes a home for you on such short notice, much less think how you're going to jam it into a suitcase or a car. So that is really hard for people. And I remember looking at the map and thinking, well, I can't go to my friends to the east because there's fires over there. I can't go to my friends to the west because that's where the big fire is right now. I can't go to the north because that is totally out of control. And I can't go to the south because my friends down in Santa Cruz and San Jose are having their own fires to deal with. So I took everything out of the car and I got in bed with my cat. And I started to read my library book, A Gentleman from Moscow. And I came to the point in the book, this is a count who has been under house arrest in a hotel in Moscow for years, been forbidden to go home. By now, it's completely razed to the ground. By the time they finally let him go, it's been decades. And this old man finally limps towards home. And in the book, he says, they say it's not possible to go home again, but it is, as long as you expect everything to have been changed. And this is where we are, most of us, with relation to home. Something has been irrevocably changed. How do we find it in our hearts, in our relationships? How do we deal with the spiritual aspects of uprooting? How do we ground ourselves in daily life? Home doesn't necessarily have to be a place. It can be a person. It can be your relationship to God. It can be anything that centers you and gives you an experience of sanctuary.
I love the subtitle of your book, The Inner Life of Home, because that really speaks to what we're all going through right now with these catastrophic changes in our world that we're just not prepared for. We haven't had time to evolve into them. We're being thrust into this world where you feel like you're standing on sand. I was actually in Colorado, taking care of my father, when the big fire hit south of Boulder, and the neighboring county was on evacuation watch. And I said, and so yeah, you take pictures, put them in a box, medicine, get the pets ready, and it's very unnerving and frightening. And you just think, well, everything's going to be gone. So this is what will be left. So I love that you speak so much, or the stories in this book speak so much to the inner sanctuary that we all can bring with us. I love the chapter on where the story of the Nigerian man writing letters to his daughter, and how he had to flee when he was a child, his home in Nigeria, due to war. And that's what most of us are used to seeing, are these war-torn countries and the horrible, sad images of people, having to flee, not by choice when you move from place to place, but because you have to for survival. And that's kind of what we're dealing with now. LA right now, as we speak, is on fire. But I want to add another layer, and then we'll get to more positive discussion. Technology, how has that changed? We're living in a very sort of untethered techno world right now, and we're not really, our species is, we're babes in the woods here with regards to that. So this technology, has it been a good thing, a bad thing? How do you see finding home and sanctuary in our online, always connected world?
Well, interestingly, Jung predicted this.
Mm.
When he was interviewed in the 50s by Elizabeth Osterman, the San Francisco analyst, she went to see him at Bollingen, which is the house he built by hand using tools from the Middle Ages. I mean, Jung really predicted that technology was going to overcome us. And that he hated the telephone. He said the tyrant rings in the middle of a conversation or while you're meditating, and it completely interrupts your life. And as our technology progresses, we will be living more and more at faster speeds, and we will be disconnected from the natural rhythms of our lives. So his whole point at Bollingen, he only had 2 houses. This is very interesting. Nobody can afford 2 houses today that I know. You can barely afford 1 if you're lucky. But the whole concept in his day was you had the house where you were the great doctor, and you had your patients come, and this was reflective of your outer relation to the world. I mean, he married Emma Jung, who was a very wealthy woman and kept an extraordinary home, and this was the great doctor's house. But he had to get to Bollingen to balance himself, and that was the house that he built by hand, and that was the house where he retreated after his break with Freud, and the tower at Bollingen was where he retreated after the death of Emma, and said his job was to confront the rhythms of eternity, not the rhythms of the modern world. So if you think about evolutionary psychology as what connects us to everything that has made us human over thousands and thousands of years of evolution, and you look at the disruption, I mean, it's no coincidence that the founders of big tech like to talk about themselves as disruptors, because they are basically disrupting our entire evolutionary pattern. So they are removing us from the natural rhythms of life and from the grounding. There's no there on the internet. Samuel Butler, the English novelist, wrote a novel called Erewhon, which is nowhere backwards. And it was a complete satire of the fact that, many of us live nowhere. And I have another friend, Eric Francis, who is a cultural critic in the Hudson Valley, and he talks a lot about not only is there no there in technology, but it's dreaming our dreams for us. It has taken over the unconscious on such a level that we no longer exchange real information or real facts anymore. We have this scrim, this continual scrim in the land of technology that replaces heartfelt relationships and thinking, deep thinking. So the world is getting more and more superficial, and with the news that Mark Zuckerberg is just removing the layer of fact checking from from his social media platform, I don't have a lot of hope right now. I think we're going to have to really go through the muck. But there is no home on the internet.
Well, I wanted to kind of pick up on this digital world thing because clearly it's in our face and creating our lives and certainly the lives of our next generations for sure. Already seeing the impact of some of that. But I want to make a little twist on the notion of place and the fact that home is not necessarily a place. But here we are having a conversation 3,000 miles away from one another. So I live in Connecticut, and both of you are currently in California. And yet we're able to have a conversation about anything we want to talk about, but we're talking about home, a sense of where I belong or where we belong, the inner, as you say in your subtitle, the inner life of home. So I could talk right now to anybody in Japan within a matter of, 2 minutes or less. I can send an email to anybody or a text, etc. For those who have, of course, the equal distribution of the technology, that's a whole other conversation. So I just want to say, what do you think that might open up for us from the positive lens of our being able to communicate across what normally would have been the boundaries of time and space? That in a certain sense, we have moved beyond the boundaries of time and space that any human has known up to now. And here we are talking through three different machines in three different locations, 3,000 miles away from each other. So what do you say about that?
First, I want to say thank you, because you remind me of a history professor who once said to me, remember, things are never wholly one thing or another. So yes, there is the magic and the beauty of this kind of communication. And my courses on Tell Your Story of Home draw people from all around the world. And we share our very different experiences. But the bulk of technology is not helping in as much as these wonderful islands of true communication are helping. So we're in a crisis point. I think it was William Irwin Thompson, the historian, who said a thing always appears in its negative form first. And so what did we use the internet for when it first was invented? Pornography, okay? And now we have these little islands that are forming of creativity. You can see the same thing in publishing and in a lot of the major communications industries. The forms that we had before are breaking down, but you can't tamp down creativity. It will out. It will find a way. The human heart will find a way. Love will find a way. Transcendence will find a way. And this brings me to Brian Swim, my beloved friend Brian Swim, who worked with Thomas Berry, who was another mentor of mine. Brian talks about our place in the cosmos, our home in the cosmos, and the ability to look up and be completely wowed by the night sky. Now, if you live in a big city, it's hard to see the stars because the ambient light will block them out. If you go to South America and you spend some time with a tribe called the Mismene Indians, they can see 30, 40,000 stars when they look up. And they have this incredible, incredible saying that Brian reminded me of. In order to be human, say the Mismene Indians, one must dwell upon the immensities of the universe. So here we are at a point in change. And what we need are more conversations like this, more access to people that we feel at home with. I feel at home with the two of you instantly because we have the guild in common, and because we're searchers. We're all looking for a place we can call home on a very, very deep level. We're looking for that sanctuary. We're looking for that refuge. So Brian also says one other thing that I think is really important to get in for this audience. And that's about the process of creation and destruction that has given us this universe. The universe evolved from something, Brian says, out of the size of a walnut. Can you believe all this matter? All of these species, everything? And over time, species have been created and destroyed, and the whole pattern of this place we live, this biggest home possible, the whole pattern of the universe is one of constant creation and destruction. Now, Brian confessed, he said that was a little hard for me to accept as a cosmologist, this amount of destruction. We're just not comfortable with it. And yet here we are going through it in a mega sense in our society, and everybody's going through it who has to face a trial or a trauma or a climate change move or a move from famine and drought. So I asked Brian, I said, well, how did the universe manage to ever make a leap ahead with this process of creation and destruction? He said, well, it's very interesting. On a scientific level, we talk about a positive proton and a negatively charged proton. And throughout the history of the universe, we've had a relatively steady state of positive and negative charged protons. Well, there wasn't really life on Earth until a positive proton broke through the fence and changed the balance. And to me, this is a metaphor for any kind of spiritual or psychological breakthrough. And our breakthrough as a species to find more community and connection with one another. It's that one positive proton that can break through and create a Dietrich Bonhoeffer who can tell us in the last days of World War II, just before he's being executed, that home is the most important thing and we need sanctuary, each and every one of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that does seem to be the recipe baked in the evolutionary process of the cosmos, this total destruction and then life, this always turning of life and death. And I'm wondering, just to tie up the technology thing, it seems to me we have to get to a point where we use the benefits of technology, but we ground ourselves and connect with each other in the physical world, and with, nature, our planet, our physical environment. And that brings me to the story in your book of the woman who dreamt of animals. And that influenced her to become an advocate for the sea turtles. She kept dreaming of turtles. And so she left her home voluntarily, went to the coast of California, and started advocating and working for the survival of that species. So I'm wondering, is there in your mind, or in your philosophy of home and inner sanctuary, is there a responsibility that comes with that? It can't just be inner, to community. Exactly. And to other life, not just ourselves and other humans, but perhaps all life, other life in your community.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. I'm really glad you brought it up, because there are many essays in this book about this one that I found particularly moving, about how we welcome our warriors home, how we welcome our soldiers home at the VA. What kind of a home do we offer the people who've protected our notion of the nation? Mm. There's the story you mentioned of the woman. She is now, Andrea Wells is now probably, as we speak, in Africa, working to save the habitat of elephants. So if you are called to do something in your dreams or in your spiritual life, you are called to do it in the world. So to make that connection, whether you serve in a soup kitchen, whether you welcome immigrants to your community, there are 1,000 ways we can go about building a sense of community and belonging. And in our own lives, to counteract the technology, I've started writing longhand again, because I realized I missed being able to make words with my hand. And many of our great novelists, I think including Steinbeck and Hemingway, talked about how they got certain ideas from the physical aspect of writing, not banging things out on a typewriter, which was considered technology then, but having the feel. I know a lot of writers who keep journals because it keeps them in their bodies as they write. So the body is really our ultimate home. There are essays in the book on aging, on mothering, on how we ground ourselves physically, in this body as our home. So we have so many ways that we can create sanctuary for ourselves, in so many ways that we can find it. Meditation is another one, where you just simply stop and you connect with something larger than yourself, and that is home for as long as you're doing it.
I'd like to connect the dots a little bit here about our inner life and our home, and our creation of home. Since there's no perfect parents and there's no perfect kids, we could say there's no perfect home, but there's degrees of dysfunction, as we know, and we all participate. But is there anything you could suggest if my home experience has been particularly traumatic, or a particular time of my life when my time at home was not pleasant? Is there a way in which reconstructing or reimagining or creating home space help us toward healing some of these inner uh, experiences so that they can be more a positive transformation in our life? How can home help us?
Well, it's going to be a very individual solution, but I will say, just by way of example, that every time I moved, I saw it as a ritual of reaffirming life, and I moved a lot. So I could have gone, everybody has a mixed experience of home, okay? And it falls somewhere on the spectrum. So if you're trying to overcome something that was hurtful and was difficult, one of the things in many forms of therapy is you look for a positive experience of that, and you use that to ground yourself as you try and work through the tough parts. We all need to be grounded when we work through our traumas, rather than push directly into the trauma to face it head on. That's very often very damaging. So what you have to do is work around. And for me, I think I healed myself from all those moves by making home a kind of sacred place, by having an altar, by the process of unpacking was something that I just couldn't wait to do, because I felt I was releasing everything that had meaning for me. I was releasing from its container, and I was ritually placing it somewhere. You can have a mezuzah on the door, and you can have an altar in your garden, or you can have a vision board in your office where you have all the ideas that you love and care about, or you can have a family wall of pictures of all the people that you care about. But you ground yourself in whatever tool you have to ground yourself with. And that's going to be individual, but it's absolutely necessary to do. So in a way, we're all losing our sense of home and belonging on a national level right now, because the country's never been so divided, and we long to be past that. So what can we do? We can start conversations. We can start building community in an apolitical way, where we're not judging other people for where they came from, ideologically or not. We have to learn how to stay away from some of these hot topics. Kaiser Permanente and the CDC did an amazing study about 20 years ago, called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACE study. And they found that people who had really traumatic and difficult homes as children had higher rates of heart disease, cancer, lung disease, you name it, illness across the board in their adult lives. So one thing we need to do on a national level is make caring for our children and our families a top priority. And I'm very worried that we're going to be in for a hard time with supporting families in the years ahead. So that means doing everything we can as individuals. If our government and our main structure is all of a sudden going to turn its energies away from that direction, that puts more responsibility on us to really hook up in our communities and ask, what's needed here? How can we help? My neighbor
I
just
want to,
a wonderful thing called Make It Home. My new neighbor has a nonprofit called Make It Home, and she takes all kinds of donations because when people go from being homeless, which is a huge problem here in California, to having a place to live, they have no way to furnish it, and basically they are given a check or an Amazon credit. This is it. They're giving an Amazon credit to the homeless people, and they could spend the whole thing on a mattress and that would be it. And there would be no sense of home. There would just be that mattress staring at you, probably without even a pair of sheets on it. And so Make It Home, everybody, instead of taking something to the dump or instead of, putting it up at a consignment shop, it goes in this place now called Make It Home. And people come away with artwork for the walls, the vase for their flowers, every little thing that could make you feel that this is a homely place to be.
I just want to, you reminded me of something I do all the time, uh, and I hadn't really thought about it, is that even if I'm going away for the weekend and I have my suitcase and I'm only staying in this hotel or whatever for a night or 2 nights, within 3 minutes of being in that room, I am putting things in the drawer or I'm putting something on the table. I am I am making myself present in there. And it bothers me if I don't do that. So it's a curious inner directive of I want to be staying in this place even a very short time, but I am wanting to bring myself here. And I do that through unloading the suitcase or putting this and that or whatever, even if it's just putting my toothbrush by the sink. I feel like I'm here. So that was interesting to become aware of as you were speaking early on. I know that we have a little bit of time. I'm sure Linnell has another question. I'll leave that for her, and then I want to just make a little comment at the end about Brian Swim. It's all yours, Linnell.
I love your story that you told, Valerie, when you were a child, where whenever you moved, maybe it was a daily practice, you would lie on the earth and connect. So really, I mean, in a sense, no matter where we are, we're home. If we can keep that connection to the love of Mother Earth. I did want to kind of touch, I know that you are a specialist in Jungian psychology, and I'm wondering if there are any archetypes that might reflect home, or how the Jungian archetypes might. Is this too big of a question for the end? That's a whole podcast episode in itself, isn't it? But I wanted to give you an opportunity. I know we have a lot of friends and listeners that like Jung, so.
Well, home itself is an archetype, and it is the theme of all of our storytelling, from the Odyssey to the Wizard of Oz. It's every writer asks, can you go home again? How do you get home again? What do you have to endure? What trials and tribulations to get home again? Samuel Butler, who I mentioned before, actually was quite a character, and he insisted, after he translated the Odyssey, that it must have been written by a woman because it was so home-oriented, because home was the theme. And why is Odysseus out there wandering? And why is he away from his wife Penelope? And why has he left his son in the care of a mentor? Because he needs to be home, and the entire point of the Odyssey is all the trials and tribulations we endure in order to get home. So in the archetype of home itself is about something that we have, and then we lose, and then we find our way back to. And I think you will also find that archetype at the core of just about every religion. We are born into a state of wholeness or holiness. We forget that, and then we have to come home again. So this is the spiritual journey, this is the psychological journey, and this is the physical journey that we are all on, whether we're aware of it or not.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
So I have been ruminating about this and enjoying your book with all its various approaches to home in our conversation. And I have to say, Brian Swim's section in 10 pages at the end of your book, Finding Our Way Home, Finding Our Home in the Cosmos, has to be the most clear and succinct and on point comments I have heard that really are clarifying as to his understanding of this new cosmic story and our place as human beings. And I've been thinking about home then as this really profound need to belong, our strong need to belong. And that connection, we've talked a lot about the natural world here, but I'm wondering, as Brian talks about this kind of new creation story of our being the expressions of the universe. And so I'm wondering how you can extend that notion as we're moving clearly through a various ways of understanding how we belong to ourselves, to one another, to community, to the country, to the planet. What is this evolutionary story, this new cosmic story? What does it have to offer us in our understanding of our strong need to belong? And what might this this new cosmic connection help us to understand?
Brian tells a story at the end of our interview about a young child. His wife is a grade school teacher, so he very gingerly went into this discussion of the time where he went and talked to a grade school because this was his wife's territory, and so he talked about the story of the universe to this class and told them, "We are stardust. We are made of the same atoms that have been at the creation of the universe that exist in every star." And I joked with him. I said, "And the dust under our bed is cosmic dust, and everything that we come in contact with on this earth is made up of these molecules from the Big Bang." So as he was explaining this to a class of fourth graders, this young boy put his hand up to his head, and he realized at that moment that he was stardust and that he was sacred. And I mean, it reminds me of the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song from the 60s, "We are stardust, we are golden." And here this child in fourth grade had suddenly got it, that he was part of creation. And that is going to change how we treat each other. It's going to change how we treat the planet. It's going to change how we think of everything, because we are cosmic beings. We are not just somebody in a little town somewhere trying to figure out how to get along. We carry this other inheritance. And it's this inheritance of the sacredness of the entire universe and the miracle of life. Now, this used to be solely the province of certain mystics and some religions. And now we have this new universe story, which, if it does become our story, can ground us spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and help us create a sense of belonging that is not tribal, that is not based on knee-jerk differences, that is based on the sacredness of every individual.
Well, thank you, Valerie. I think we're just about at the end. This has been a really beautiful and rich conversation. I really appreciate your time with us today. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to let our listeners and viewers know where they can find you and where can they find this wonderful book everyone needs to get, if you can see it, Sanctuary.
Sanctuary is available on Amazon, and you can also get a Kindle version. On Amazon, it's also available from the publisher, which is Chiron in North Carolina. You can learn more about Sanctuary and about the ideas that went into it from my website, which is valerieandrews.org. And I encourage you to look through back issues of the magazine Reinventing Home, They are all available online, and that's reinventinghome.org.
Thank you. And before we close, finally, is there a particular quote you might like to raise up? Something that you favor that sort of summarizes things for you that
Well,
we can hold as a common theme of our conversation.
I was going to give you a quote from Brian Swim, but I have decided after this conversation that I'm going to give you one from Jung that really struck home for me during the pandemic and was one of the inspirations for the magazine. What America needs in the face of the tremendous urge towards uniformity, desire of things, the desire for complications in life, for being like one's neighbors, is one great healthy ability to say no, to rest a minute and realize that many of the things being sought are unnecessary to a happy life. We want simplicity. We are suffering in our cities from a need to simplify things. We would like to see our great terminals deserted, the streets deserted, a great peace descend upon us. This, to me, was the gift of the pandemic, what it reminded us of.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to be with you, and we're very, very happy to have enjoyed Sanctuary with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the conversation.